Yeah, optimizing compost applications for soil health and farm productivity. A lot of the um, webinars and conferences that I go to, I end up going to a lot about compost, obviously, and they all kind of cover the same sort of thing about like why we compost, what is compost, how do we make compost, and I just haven't seen very much on how to we actually use compost and more of the subtle nuance of that topic. So this is going to be more for like advanced composters or like people who are really nerds about it and know a little bit more of the baseline information. I'm going to go over some of it so that we're kind of all on the same page. But if you're interested in learning more about compost and just the wide world of it, I do teach a course at the SRJC at Schoen Farm in the spring. And actually, I'm going to move my slide over to introduce myself a little bit further. Why do I know so much about compost? I have a background in agroecology. I graduated from UC Berkeley and I studied agroecology. I studied sustainable food systems and I really kind of leaned into that niche in composting. My thesis was on centralized composting facilities. I realized that it was just this wonderful niche of waste management and also soil fertility, and it just closed the loop on how these materials, how we use these resources, and what happens to them after we're done, and how we recycle them back into the environment so that we can continue to benefit and reap the rewards from them instead of locking them underground where they're polluting the atmosphere. So that was my background with it, and I ended up teaching over at Schoen Farm and managing their compost operations for 3 years. I still teach this course. It runs April 6th through May 11th. So if you're interested in learning that Compost 101, how to produce compost is really the focus on it, how to make like on-farm composting systems. But we do cover a broad range of topics within the composting um, subject. And so we are currently waitlisted, but that number is going to fluctuate as the semester continues. Like people enroll at the beginning of the semester, and then by the time April comes around, they might not be still available to do the class. So please, if you're interested in it, register as an SRJC student and get on that wait list and I'm sure that we will have a spot for you come April. We do a lecture and a lab, so people, it's on site. So anybody who um, wants to join us, we do a lab and as a group, we build a compost pile and maintain that pile for the 6 weeks of the course. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy the class a lot. People tend to walk away with it with a much greater understanding of what goes into this science, which it is a science. If you're interested in consultation, I have a consultation business as well. You can check it out, cgsoils.com. I do on-site consulting, design, and contracted services, depending on the available equipment and timing and everything. So, yeah, please give me a call or check me out. You can give me an email, and I would be happy to talk about your site-specific questions. I'm not going to have a lot of time today to go over your particular system, but I'd be happy to chat with you about it further. Okay, so workshop logistics. I'm gonna just kind of speed through this lecture as fast as I can, but if you have any questions, I'm gonna try to leave some time at the end. Please, there's a Q&A tab in the app, so please utilize that. Put your question there, and I'll try to cover it at the end if possible, if we have time. For the schedule of today, I'm going to overview some of that basic vocabulary, make sure that we all know what we're talking about, and then get into the nitty-gritty, the dirty stuff, the cropping systems, and the current research that we have around some of the data about disease suppression and things like that, like some of the claims that we have about compost. Okay, so to get started, excuse me. Mm. What is compost? What is composting? That simple, very simple definition is that we are managing natural processes. Decomposition is as old as organic matter. It is nature's form of recycling. It's just a way of transforming elements and nutrients from one form to another. And so we're taking things that would be trash, would be put in a landfill normally, but we're taking that and we're mimicking nature and we're managing the conditions that we have for our objectives, because the objectives could be different, and we're calling it composting. And then at the end, we have what's called compost. But I put in this note that more accurately, we want to call it composts, plural, because compost is often treated like this blanket statement, like it's just one inert product that is the same across the charts. And that's just not the case. Like every batch of compost is going to be different because there are a lot of factors, management factors that go into producing compost and storing compost and all of these things. And it's just constantly changing. It's never going to be the same batch twice, and it's not going to stay the same throughout its life. So who is composting and who composts? I'm going to close that. There we go. Um, so who composts? So, like, where do we get it from? And there's a lot of different places that we could get it. We could do it from, you can make it yourself. You could work with neighbors. There are some community composting facilities depending on where you're at. Local farmers oftentimes are making compost or community gardens. And then we've got those larger scale facilities that are either working privately independently or working with the city for municipal waste management. And then there's also those niche industries like vermicompost or even funeral homes, like as the natural organic reduction starts becoming more and more popular and legal throughout the area. We're going to start seeing human bodies becoming compost as well, which is just a really fabulous way of returning to the earth, in my opinion. But where are they going? Because a lot of people use compost, and more than you would imagine than just like farmers and gardeners. We're talking to farmers today, probably, but we've also got like property landscaping, we've got golf courses, nurseries, construction sites use a lot of compost and as water filtration, stormwater management, road repair. Like there's a lot of different uses that you wouldn't imagine compost being. But not every use for compost requires the same quality of compost. And that's really what I'm trying to get at. Oh, okay, so the role of compost in the ecosystem. So we've all heard all these claims about like why we want to use compost. And compost right now is being championed as like a key mitigator for the effects of climate change. And that is because of the ability of compost to enhance the soil, what the soil already does, which is store carbon. So there's just this picture here. We're talking about like moving nutrients and transforming them from soluble, like available carbon to or from atmospheric carbon to like stored carbon in the earth. And that's done through photosynthesis, it's done through respiration of microorganisms, and this is just happening and occurring naturally. But what we've discovered is that as we apply compost to the soil, then it increases the health of the soil, which increases the ability of the soil and the way that it relates with plants to pull atmospheric carbon out of the air and trap it and store it in the soil. So it's a really um, big strategy, really useful strategy for getting a lot of those greenhouse gases out of the air and putting them back down into the ground and just kind of improving the health of the soil and the health of our crops and our plants that we rely upon for survival. So, looking at this in another way, we've got all of these different ecosystem services that we get from having a healthy soil, and then we have the benefits that compost provides to the soil so that it actually can function and provide those services to us. So we really need soil in our world to survive, and so I really am like, compost is going to save the world, guys. And it's just something that I really love to talk about. But we have more and more data that's showing that this is real. This is totally a thing, and we need to really be paying attention to it. So that's the why, and I'm sure that you guys already know the why, but we're gonna get into the how a little bit more. But before we do that, um, I want to talk about the C to N ratio because this is just like a bit of vocabulary that I think a lot of people get stuck on. Um, we talk about the C to N a lot, and we talk about it as compost producers and also as farmers, and we could be referring to a lot of different things, like talking about like the individual ingredients that make compost, or the ratio of carbon and nitrogen ingredients within a whole pile, or we could be talking about the finished product after it's gone through like a decomposition process, because that's going to be a different number than it was when it started. And then we're going to talk about the receiving soil and the carbon and nitrogen ratio that's there. When we're talking about this ratio, we want to understand that it's not the amount of these elements that are in whatever we're talking about, it's how they relate to one another. So we're expressing how much more carbon there is than nitrogen, and nitrogen's always going to equal one in this ratio. So we're talking about, if we have 1 part nitrogen, how many more parts carbon do we have? But it doesn't mean that there's only 1 part nitrogen in the soil. So I just wanted to clarify that. To continue, just give it an example of using the C to N when you're applying compost. If you have, let's talk about finished compost, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means, like a finished compost, because you're never going to look at a person who's grown and call them finished. And I want to kind of look at compost less as like this inert, stable, or like an inert substance that is not alive, because it is very full of life, and think of it as like a living organism. It's that number's going to change. It's not static. Even after you've purchased it, it's going to continue to decompose the materials within it and continue to change that C to N. So if you're going to have like a high C to N, you're having something that's got a lot of carbon and not a lot of nitrogen. So like the higher the number, so we're looking at like sawdust over here, that's 401. The higher that number, the more carbon there is and the less nitrogen there is. Sawdust doesn't have a lot of nitrogen in it, but it's got a lot of carbon. Whereas the lower the number, the less carbon there is, the more nitrogen there is. So you've got certain materials like blood meal that's going to be like a 5 to 1, something like that. So it's vastly different. When we talk about finished compost, we are talking about something that's going to be more like 10 to 15 to 1. And that number, like I said, is going to change. When you get lab results from like a facility, and it says what the C to N is, that's what the C to N was when it was tested. So most likely it's going to be a little bit different. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you add a high C to N, like something with like a lot of carbon, a lot of woody material into a soil that has a low C to N, you're going to be trapping that nitrogen for a while, because that nitrogen is going to be utilized by the microbes that are in the compost and used to continue composting, to continue decomposing the carbon that's in that compost. And so that nitrogen is going to be immobilized, and but eventually it will be released back. It's going to be more of like a slow release. So it is good for like long-term fertility. But like with that slow release, and especially if you pair it with more nitrogen, if you add an extra nitrogen source to it, so that you can kind of buffer that, but then you're going to get like a slow release of nitrogen over time. If you want something that's more immediate, than choosing something that's got like a high nitrogen content already, like a low C to N. That's going to break down pretty rapidly. But if you don't have material, you don't have roots in the ground already active, able to absorb that, then you potentially have nitrogen leachate happening. So you want to think about that as you are using this material. How much nitrogen do you need within the compost compared to your receiving soil? Okay, and just to really drill this in, like compost is not a uniform blanket term. Like we're talking about individual organisms at this point. They're not dead. They're not static. They age, they grow, they die. They can potentially if you store it poorly. Even after you've received it, you've gotten like a good high quality compost, you've received it, and then you stored it poorly. You potentially contaminated it. You potentially killed off the microbes that are inside of it, creating more of a sterile product. And we don't want to think of compost as sterile, even though it goes through like a sterilization process. When we talk about sterilizing compost, we're talking about creating intentional microbial populations versus having something that might be pathogenic, might be dangerous for humans or for your crops. We go and we do this what's called like a pathogen reduction process, which is uh, allowing like creating the conditions for compost to heat up to a certain temperature and stay at that temperature for a long time. And that temperature is going to kill off a lot of the harmful bacteria and other microbes that are going to make you sick. But it is not a sterile product. And it is not static. It's not you want it to become more stable over time, but it is constantly changing, even still, even after you've received it. And so there are going to be multiple factors that are altering that finished product as well. And so, like I said, no two composts are going to be the same. We're talking about like management decisions, like how long, how many times was it turned, how long was it cured, things like that that are going to change what you have in your hands or in your fields at any given time. Not like I mentioned, not all uses for compost requires the same quality of compost. And so you might find that you can get by with like an uncured, unfinished, unstable, not mature compost, depending on what you're using it for. So, and that's going to change the cost, like if you want to purchase a designer compost that has like all of these different fortifications within it, that you have like a really high quality thing for your crops, then you're going to pay a little bit extra for that versus using something that hasn't even gone through the whole process yet. That might actually hurt your crops if you put it on the wrong time. But if you're not using it for cropland, for instance, you can get away with that. So you want to think about what your objectives are as a grower or as like a consumer of this product. Bacterial compost versus fungal compost, that's going to be different versus like depending on your systems. And the texture, the particle size, whether or not you want something that's more woody, whether or not you want something that's screened to be more fine, and that's going to alter, or that's going to be changed depending on like what you're using it for. So when you're testing, what do we use to determine what is quality? I have a lab here. This is from my time at Schoen, and this is just to give you an example of you have a sample of compost, you send it into the lab, and this is what they're going to test for. This particular lab tests, and this particular test that we purchase is for nutrient content and whether or not it's stable and mature, whether it has heavy metals in it, whether it's got pathogens in it. But then there are other labs that will also do tests for persistent herbicides or for for PFAS or for like microplastics or for like microbial populations, specific microbial populations. If you want to know more about it, then you're going to have to like find the lab that's going to test for it. Or you do something what's called like a bioassay, which is growing just like a basically like a growth trial in a greenhouse. You try to grow certain crops that are more susceptible or more sensitive to certain things, and then you can determine whether or not they have good vigor, whether or not they germinate at a good rate, and some of the issues within that. So when we are determining compost quality, we want to look at like the maturity, the stability, the your C to N, what's available, what nutrients are available, the electrical conductivity, the pH, microbes, particle size, whether or not it's got contaminants in it physically that you can see, and and the like. And so I'm just making sure I've got everything here. Yeah, so and like I had mentioned that like all of these things, these factors, these managerial factors as the compost is being produced is going to affect what kind of quality you have at the end. Okay, so contaminants is a quite a big concern that a lot of growers have, and so I wanted to address it briefly. When we're talking about contaminants, we have two major families of contaminants. We have the physical contamination and we have chemical contamination. And physical is something that you can see, like plastic, or you can't see, like microplastics, or metal or glass. Like these are going to create issues, potentially a lot of the times, like when it comes to trash, what I've learned with compost is that like there's always going to be trash. Trash is everywhere. Even in compost facilities that don't even take municipal waste, there still somehow ends up with trash in it. And so I tend to just not worry too much about it. Like I take it out as I see it. And I understand that like some things kind of slip through the whole screening process. For chemical contamination, that's a little bit harder because that's invisible. And so you could have like a very perfect type of compost, but then you end up with like a persistent herbicide in it that is going to harm your crops. That's been an issue that has shut down compost facilities in the past. And so we asked like what can be done to avoid these. I feel really bad for the composters, the producers of compost, because that material is being manufactured and used there, and then composters are like the end of the line, and they're the ones who end up with all of the issues with people saying like, well, I don't want compost that has this in it. And it's like, okay, well then stop making it and stop using it. And so there is a certain amount of consumer responsibility that I want to really drill into people. Like we have a lot of education that is going out, especially in California right now, as we are being mandated to reduce the amount of organic matter that is ending up in landfills. And that's everybody's responsibility. That's the facility's responsibility, but that is also you as a consumer of these products to reduce the amount of consumption and also to sort and make sure that they don't end up contaminating the green waste bins that end up in facilities. But then also we could go a step further and try to regulate the manufacturing of these products, so that we don't even have to deal with them in the end. Things like PFAS, they're everywhere. There's a lot of concern right now about them in microplastics in compost, and I just want to like reiterate, like it's in your water. They're everywhere. So if we want to reduce the amount of exposure that we have to these materials, then we need to stop making them, and we need to go to the people who are making them and try to regulate that in some way. Because, we're dealing with the people who are just trying to deal with the stuff that nobody else wants to deal with, you know? And then there's also the facility management where there is screening, there is regular testing, there are things that a lot of these facilities are doing to try to reduce the amount of exposure to these contaminants. But it is a major issue with facilities to try like they've got to hire people to just walk through and physically hand pick out a lot of the trash that ends up in green waste bins. And that shouldn't have to happen. We all need to change the culture of waste that we have and that's an active process that all of us are responsible for. Okay, so questions to ask as a grower, because you want to really define your objectives and to figure out like a plan for yourself before you just say like, let's just put some compost on it. So asking yourself like, what do I need compost for? What are the properties of the receiving soil, and what does that soil need? Yeah, where am I doing it? Because that's going to possibly change where on your farm, like one type of soil to another. So like actually really paying attention to the nuance of what your soils are like. When the timing's going to be really important for some of these crops, and I'm going to talk a little bit more as to why. What type of compost am I planning on using? Because the characteristics of that compost, as we get into it, you'll see they're going to have an effect on how the efficacy of the function that your objectives are. And then how much should I apply? How often? The rate and the frequency of application. We're going to get into that as well. And how. How are you doing it? Are you a small grower? Do you have access to a spreader? Do you have, and what kind of spreader? A large one, a small one? Does it do broadcasting? Does it do bands? Like these are like details that as you start to get into the logistics of, okay, I've got a lot of compost. Now what? You're going to get into that like nitty-gritty stuff. Like how am I even going to apply it? And I think a lot of people don't think about that. I was working for a while as a technical assistance provider for the Healthy Soils program, and I worked with a lot of farmers who they got a grant for compost and they got all this compost, and then they're like, how do we spread this? Like, what do we do with this? Because they didn't have access to a spreader. And there are some facilities that will rent a spreader out. And you can check in and see whether or not that's available. But of course, like with timing, everybody wants it at the same time. And there's user error. Not everybody knows how to use a spreader. And so there's some of that. So like actually part of what I'm thinking about doing is like getting a hold of a spreader and contracting that service. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, so here's spreaders for small farm if you're interested. So there's a lot of different kinds, and this is just to give a visual of what I was just talking about, all the different kinds of spreading. This is for small scale equipment, but then you've got large industrial spreaders that are on the back of like semis that go out into pastures and spread at like this mass rate. And one of the things that as you start to do this, you're going to realize that there's a little bit of it's seldom straightforward as to calculating the application rates of these spreadings, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about the compost characteristics and how they relate to the uses that you're trying to make happen. Mm. Okay, so. This is a really cool chart, I think, in showing how this compost use, like so if you're using it for soil quality, for instance, some of these characteristics of compost just really don't matter so much. Like the C to N, the particle size, like that's not going to matter so much as introducing more carbon. Organic matter is really what's the most important part of that. Whereas, for instance, if you are trying to supply your nutrients there, then your nutrient content is going to be like a big deal, obviously. Your pH, your C to N, the availability of those nutrients are also going to matter. And so this is just a cool chart, I think, that just like gives you a nice visual of how these characteristics interact with the soils that are receiving them. Okay, so this is going into that a little bit more in detail. So if you're If your goal, your objective is to improve your degraded soils, then you're going to want a lot of carbon. You're going to want a lot of stable carbon, stable organic matter, because it's going to improve your cation exchange capacity, which is the ability of the soil to transfer positively charged ions onto a negative surface. It's just the ability of these nutrients to become more accessible to the plant for plant uptake. And so if you're going to be doing that, you want to potentially till it in, or at least initially, to allow it for greater incorporation into the soil, because that's just going to accelerate that. And then you would, a note on pH is that like a lot of composts tend to be a little bit slightly alkaline. And so if you have an alkaline soil already, then you're going to want to try to find a compost that is actually more acidic and has low sodium in it, so that that as the pH tends to lean towards the compost, you're getting more of a neutral ground there. So an important note is that compost is often used synonymously with fertilizer, and it's not a fertilizer. It's not exactly, unless it's been fortified as a fertilizer. But um, straight compost is, you want to think of it more as like a vitamin for your soil. It's less about providing your crops with those key like NPK nutrients, and more about providing the soil with a healthy balance of micro and macronutrients, so that it improves the functioning of the microbes within the soil, of the crops that grow, like use the medium, all of that. And so it's like a nice little soil amendment. It's not a fertilizer. And often, if you are trying to apply as much compost as a crop needs for fertilization, like for instance, like if you were trying to apply as much compost as a tomato needs for nitrogen, you're going to smother. It's going to be so much, it's going to be impossible to get the amount of nitrogen that a tomato, like a high nitrogen, high feeding crop, is going to use. And in fact, if you are going to apply at nitrogen-based application rates, then you are potentially going to over apply the amount of phosphorus that you need. It's going to reach the upper limit and become like toxic for the plants. And so on land that already has a lot of phosphorus in it, you want to think more about the phosphorus requirements than the nitrogen requirements, because that upper limit is a lot lower. Um, let's see. Yeah, so using compost in conjunction with other fertilizers is advised, at least another source of nitrogen, and other looking at what your nutrient needs actually are for the soil, and supplying them with other sources in combination with compost, because compost is going to really give you a lot of carbon, and it's going to give you a lot of microbes, but it's not necessarily going to give you a lot of nitrogen. But it might slow release nitrogen, which is really nice for certain systems. Um, Compost is mulch. So if you're going to use a thicker compost, you want to use it as mulch. So how do I want to put this? So a lot of composts that are out there, if they're not animal based, if they don't have manure in it, then it's actually considered a mulch than it is a compost. And there are some facilities which will basically put mulch through like a composting process, where the mulch will get hot enough, it'll go through that pathogen reduction process and sterilize, but it's actually still just very, very high carbon and very woody. And that's really great for certain systems if you want a mulch, right? And so in this, like things like an orchard, for instance, if you want more of like a perennial system that's just adding a lot of carbon and cause like creating like weed suppression and creating like conserving your moisture, like protecting your soil from erosion, then yeah, adding like a high carbon compost, a high C to N compost is going to be the way to go. But the way things to note about that is that if you're adding that high carbon to your system, then you are trapping that nitrogen, right? So if you don't want to do that, then adding another excess source of nitrogen, as long as there are roots in the ground that can take it up and not leach it out, then that could be really great. For like a vineyard that has too much vigor, that could be a really great way of helping to compete with the nitrogen that's in the soil, or like compete for the nitrogen in the soil, is like creating more of a mulch. So yeah, just different, a little bit nuance there in these different systems and how to use compost in different ways. Okay, so you have these when you're making compost, then what feedstocks you use are going to change what characteristics you have in your finished compost. And feedstocks being the ingredients that are used within the composting process. Um, so something like chicken manure, for instance, is going to have a lot of available nitrogen. It's going to have a lot of calcium in it. It's not going to have a ton of phosphorus. Which I thought was different. Like I thought it was a high phosphorus, but according to this chart, not so much. Um, Electrical conductivity, like a pretty neutral pH. But if you're looking at, for instance, like composted yard waste, which is mostly carbon, um, and maybe some greens and things, but it's not like a low C to N manure, then you're gonna have a lot less available nitrogen, and just basically a lot less of the nutrients in general, but you are going to have more carbon. No, not so much more. Yeah, there we go. Organic carbon 46 versus everything like 24 or 16. So you can just kind of take a look at the chart and see the different characteristics that come out of these different ingredients. And it really does matter what kind of ingredients you use when it comes to your finished product. Okay, so when you are applying compost and you're trying to figure out, okay, how much do I put on? What is my rate? What is my frequency? That sort of thing. It is kind of difficult actually to come up with it. And I try to think about it from like a practical farming perspective, right? Because I have a farming background and I've done this before in machines. I've had to determine how fast do I need to drive? How powerful the RPM needs to be? How fast the wheels are spinning in the spreader? How high should the doors be open? How fast should the belt be moving? This sort of thing. Like there's a lot of different factors, and really a lot of it is kind of guesswork. It's like estimated guesswork. And you're just basically doing the best you can and just trying to stay consistent with it and making a lot of observations as you go. Because you have like only so much amount of compost, you're trying to spread it at trying to make it stretch across so much land. And you're making adjustments as you go. So the practical reality of translating what should be 6 to 8 tons per acre, depending on what the regulation is and what your goals are. You and then translating that to like the practical steps. It's pretty interesting. It takes a lot of math, but it at the same time, you're still kind of like making educated guesses. We don't have a lot of data for how it affects our crop yields. A lot of the compost recommendations for application rates have to do with how much soil carbon we're trying to get, so that soil organic matter target. And it's less about how much you want to put on for your crops. It's also just what has been done, what is done in your area on a regular basis. So like your local practices and the results that you get from that. What kind of limits are on for regulation? Like, and that's really going to be about timing a lot of the times. Like CCOF has certain timing for when you can put on certain types of compost. The cost, how much you have, how much you can get, how much you're going to try to make spread over a certain amount of time, um, and what your nutrient targets are. So, and then there's some confusion sometimes with transform trans transferring it from weight to area, right? So we've got like tons per acre, milligrams per hectare, but then we've also got like yards. And so you might be okay. I've got such and such yards of compost. How do I translate that to tons? When the weight's going to change based on your moisture content. And so we're using a lot of estimates here. So we could say like estimates of weight, it would be like 2 dry tons equals 1 cubic yard. That's not always the case, right? Because it that moisture level is going to change how much it actually weighs. We say dry tons, but sometimes things get rained on right before you use it, that sort of thing. So you really have to kind of make some adjustments and really just kind of use your common sense and what you're observing and just do the best you can. Um, okay, so we're going to get into specific agricultural applications now and get more into like the nuance and the details here. So starting with field crops. So when you're using this large field for things like grain or corn, hay, or like you're using on a large pasture, more than likely you're not going to be hand spreading, right? Like that would take forever, but you might end up contracting with a spreader or using a spreader with the whatever facility you're using. They might have an option for using a large scale industrial spreader, and that's just going to go on and just shower the field. And when we're talking about like 5 tons per acre, it sounds like a lot, but it's really just like a light dusting at the end of the day. Like you look at it and you're like, did this get composted? So it goes on like fairly light. It doesn't take a lot, and a little goes a long way when you're doing these large field crops like this, then you are um, gonna want to do like 2 to 10 tons per acre. You're gonna be applying it before you harvest or after you harvest, not during the growing season. And most likely, it's going to be incorporated by some kind of tillage if you are on like a tilled spot. Um, and doing that initially is actually like a fairly good idea, but then I have some thoughts about tilling because you're kind of release every time you turn the soil, you're releasing a lot of that soil carbon into the atmosphere as well. So you're kind of undoing a lot of the carbon storage that you were trying to do by adding the carbon back to it. So you're going to probably end up needing to do it fairly often versus a non-tilled place where you would add an initial amount, a lot of carbon, and then over time reduce the amount of compost that you're using in the subsequent years. So something like vegetable crops, if you're in a garden, like a no-till garden, that would be when you use a lot of carbon, right, a lot of compost right at first, and then you reduce that amount until you don't even need it anymore because you have enough soil organic matter and you have enough of these nutrients in the soil that you don't need to continue to apply. Um, let's see. I'm trying to hurry this up a little bit so I have some time for questions at the end. So go ahead. So I have these slides available on the website as well. So I have a PDF of these slides. So you don't have to like frantically take these notes or anything. You can definitely go back and check them out at another time. please check into the whole point is that as you are determining how much compost to use, there are specific things for each cropping system. And you want to try to get as specific as possible. I'm not going to go into all of these though. Okay, so small fruits. Um, This is a little bit difficult to generalize because the small fruit category is very diverse. There's perennials, there's annuals, but we're thinking about mostly like perennials in this. They tend to benefit from more long-term thinking when it comes to compost application. Rather than like a quick release of nutrients, you want to think about that slow release and think about that timing as you're doing slow release as well. Um, because like some of them are very sensitive to what you're doing, like for instance, blueberries, you want to think about the characteristics of your compost a little bit more closely. Like blueberries, for instance, they don't want a lot of like animal-based compost because there's a high pH, there's the electrical conductivity, and there's a lot of potassium from compost made from that, and it can actually damage the crop. So you don't want to put on compost thinking that you're benefiting your crop and you actually end up damaging it. So you do want to get very focused into the like specifics and get more nuanced with it. You can't think of it as like a blanket term. So when you are applying some to some crops, you will really want to think about the timing of that slow release because if you apply compost too late in the season, then as it starts to release that nitrogen, then it's creating like vigor later on in the season when these plants should be going dormant. And you could be causing some the delaying of that hardening off, causing like winter injury because you've released nitrogen at a time when they should be sleeping. So, paying attention to your timing is going to be really important. But in things like a perennial system like a vineyard, creating more of like fungally dominated compost or like adding a more of a fungally dominated compost so that it can create these mycelial networks in the root systems. If you're not tilling them, if you're allowing for the development of these populations of microorganisms in within your rhizome, within your root system, then you're gonna just create more like nutrient flow and like a healthier ecosystem. And so you would want to choose a compost that is more beneficial for that than something that's going to be like a quick release of nutrients or like a burst of bacteria, which are more designed for annual systems. Same sort of thing with tree crops. It's a long-lasting perennial, so you can be using more of a mulch than like a fine compost. But you do want to pay attention to like spacing away from trees in that regard because it can discourage because it can if you've got like a pile up of like woody material right around the base of the tree, then you can cause like root rot and different fungal diseases and also get like rodent nesting, which is not what you want to do. Okay, so for nurseries, with nurseries, you've got little tiny baby plants that are very sensitive and aren't very strong. And so you want something that's um, probably more of a mixed medium. You don't really want to produce in just pure compost because of high salt levels and high levels of nitrogen or like more nitrogen than it needs. And the pH is going to be affecting it as well. And so you want to have something that has a bit more dilution in it than like a straight compost, adding different ingredients in it to create more mixed medium. And something that's finer instead of like chunky things that little seedlings can't really push through is the way to go. Okay, so getting into the data, the research, which is really interesting in my opinion. Like I actually put the whole chapter that I used here because there was just so much information that was really like very nuanced, very specific that I just thought was like really fascinating stuff. So I got a lot of this information from the composting handbook. It's basically like a big Bible for composters. And it has a lot, it's more for like industrial scale composting. And if you're like a really, really big compost nerd, I would highly recommend it. But if you're not, then I would say just go check out this chapter if you're interested. But yeah, they've got a lot. It's just everything, all things to do with compost is like this thick. And, so the idea with disease suppression is that is a lot of data that's showing that there's like good science here that's supporting this claim that compost can help suppress pathogens like crop pathogens because of the various microorganisms that are involved in it. And there are actually like specific microorganisms that we're dealing with the pathogen with specific crops, and there are certain composting feedstocks that you want to use to encourage other microbial populations that will help to compete or parasitize or deal with these pathogens. And so you want to be very specific with this because if you add the wrong compost at the wrong time, you can actually make it worse. And so, yeah, that's a like super important factor is you want to really make sure that you're getting the compost that has the microbial populations in it that you specifically want for this problem, if that's why you're using it. The and use it at the right time. And yeah. So learn more is basically what I'm trying to say is like do the research and learn as much as you can about it before you use it for this purpose. Mechanisms for plant defense. So we know enough about it to know how these organisms work to cause this disease suppression, which is just really fascinating. So there's a lot of different ways that they can do it. Either they're competing for the nutrients, they're in competition, or they're in direct like prey predator relationship, or they're creating these antibiotics, these chemicals that can help kill off the opposing pathogens. They could be producing toxic compounds. They're changing the physical process properties of this growing medium to help to create more a health within the crop itself so that the crop's natural resource, natural defenses are activated and are able to suppress the disease by themselves. So there's a lot of different ways that it works, and it's all very specific, and you just really have to get into those nitty-gritty details if you're going to be into this, if you're going to be using it like this. And I would say check out that chapter for more detail. And just as a note with CCOF, they have some pretty strict standards when it comes to getting certified organic compost. And this is just one um, one regulatory department, but there are other types of regulations that you might want to be paying attention to, and just like looking into how much and when and what kind of compost. If you are going for that organic certification, what that's going to be really important. I'm not going to get into like how to make compost, but if you are interested in that, in producing compost, or if you like come take my class, or if you want to learn more, like I said, if you want to learn more about your site specifically, please hit me up. If you're interested in purchasing compost, I got the hookups, I can help you out, and I'd be happy to chat further about your specific needs outside of this workshop. And okay, so if you are interested in learning more about this, then please check out these sources. This is where I got a lot of this information. Composting Handbook has a ton of it, but then they also provide like full a lot of different other sources for this information to go even further into that. All right, so let's get into questions. Let me pull this up.
All right. Thank you, Britta. We've got one here from Jeff who asks, in no-till systems, can the compost be placed on the soil surface or does it need to be incorporated into the soil to have greater efficacy?
Right. So in no-till, I think oftentimes when people transition into a no-till system, they're going to originally start with tilling and then reduce the amount of tilling over time. And that's how I've always learned to do it is that when the initial application, you want to incorporate it into the soil, but then over time, then you're going to like top dress it and you can add more compost to it later on without having to till it in.
Gotcha. Thank you. And see, another question we've got here is does the 20 to 50 ton per acre for tree crops have preconditions? This rate is too high in general sense.
20 to 50. I'm sorry, can you, does 20 to 50 tons per acre, 20 to 50 tons? That does sound very high. When we're talking about like, did I say that? Was that on my slide? Because that sounds like a lot. I'm trying to even like picture what 20 to 50 tons per acre would look like. Um, yeah, I would say that that's probably just not gonna end up happening there unless you're doing like an industrial compost spreader that's spreading it. Like I'm thinking that's going to be like a thick band of compost, which if you have like a woodier, mulchier compost, then that might make sense. Um, but have preconditions. Yeah, the rate it does sound a little bit too high. I don't, good catch because that sounds like a lot. I probably wrote it down and didn't really think through it as I was doing it, but that does sound like a lot. That sounds really high. I would say I would want to like go back and double check that before I say that's the right rate.
All right. Another question from Rachel is what about the benefits of mushroom compost?
I mean, so mushroom, I've used that as a as an ingredient, like a feedstock, like the spent mushroom substrate. And I have found that it's pretty like so mushrooms are going to take out a lot of the nutrients that are in the substrate that they've like so basically what it is you're growing mushrooms on a certain medium like hay or straw and then after it's done growing you're going to compost what's left over and that substrate's gonna like the mushrooms are gonna take out a lot of the nutrients that are already in this in that material so it's not like a high nutrient material, but it is a lot of carbon sometimes, and you can definitely use it as a feedstock. I don't have enough experience with it personally to know how it compares in quality with other types of compost, but I have heard of people using it, and I feel like and I've used it a little bit. Um, and I feel like it's kind of more of a neutral feedstock, but it can provide texture and provide carbon for the whole process. So I'd say go ahead and use it.
All right, great. Well, we got a fun question here in the Q&A, which is human composting could raise ethical questions. The location of composting needs to respect the person's life and benefit the environment. What is the best location for the human compost to be placed?
Oh, well, I feel so human composting is a growing industry, and so we're really figuring out how to do it, and like figuring out the regulations and things like that. I know that some facilities partner with conservation organizations, to put it on like a park land or like conservation land. Um, Sometimes you can receive it back. You can receive like a truckload of human compost back, and you get to determine where you put it yourself. I know that with ashes, you tend to have there are actually regulations and permitting involved in where you're supposed to spread it. I know a lot of people don't actually follow that. They don't do it. They just spread it anywhere, but there are actually permits that are required for spreading ashes. And I would imagine it's the same sort of thing with compost. Like you don't necessarily want to put it on your food crops because of the potential risk of pathogens. Um, but some people are fine with being in a compost sock. You know, if they want to like help to filter stormwater off of construction sites, like they might be totally fine with that. I think it has to do with the person's wishes. But if you get a truckload of compost back from your loved one, and then I guess it's up to you where you want to put it, and up to them. Maybe hopefully they've had the chance to communicate what they want to do with that.
Great. And here's a technical question from Irma. So when applying compost specifically to raise SOM, is
Soil
it best?
organic matter.
Yep, soil organic matter. Is it best to target a small percentage increase in SOM each year or try to do it all at once? For example, I want to raise my soil organic matter from 1.5% to 4%. Should I calculate application rates for my 2.5% goal all at once or aim to raise it incrementally each year?
Um, I would say look at what's feasible, right? Like if it's even possible to spread that much compost in 1 year. And the potential for spreading in like a thick band can cut like you're gonna cause like mulch, like you're gonna basically be mulching in that sense because you're creating like a really thick band of something that's not gonna be able like the air and gas exchange not able to so much penetrate. But you, I would say it's most likely you're going to be doing it incrementally each year. But one of the cool things about compost is that it actually increases the soil's ability to store that organic matter as well exponentially every time. So, like one application of compost is going to exponentially increase the soil's ability to store carbon by itself. Like you don't have to keep applying compost, it's going to continue to increase carbon just by carbon sequestration. The ability to sequester carbon is going to be enhanced. So I would start small, you know, like do what's feasible and what you can afford even because like a lot of people they have these like big grand ideas of I'm going to do it all at once and then they get out there and in practicality it's like how do I spread this much compost in 1 season? It's going to take a laborer how long to do this. And so you want to be able to actually look at your logistics specifically and be like, okay, what can I even do? And then make a plan from there. And I think that most likely you're going to end up doing a larger initial application and then over time over the years like do a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less until you don't need it anymore.
Awesome. All right, I've got a gear question from Ophelia. She asks, do you have any favorite attachments for a compost tractor to incorporate compost in an orchard, tree row to reduce stratification?
I mean, me personally, I don't have like a favorite tractor implement for this. I think, yeah, it just really depends on your system and how you can use these different things. For, let me see. Let me look at this question a little bit closer. Incorporate compost in an orchard tree row. Yeah, I'm not a gearhead as much like I've used certain attachments, but I couldn't tell you like a specific one, sorry.
All good. Well, let's go ahead and move on back to the soil science of it all. So, Jake asks, can you elaborate on phosphorus management? Which compost to look for, how much to use, etc.?
Elaborate on phosphorus management. Okay, so that note was about if your soils have high phosphorus, then um, you're gonna want to look for composts that, or you're gonna want to apply compost to the limit of phosphorus that you need versus applying it to the limit of like nitrogen that you're trying to get to because you're going to reach that phosphorus limit before you reach the nitrogen limit. And so that's what that note was about. I'm not sure exactly which compost you want to use. Like we would have to like go and look and compare all the different types of composts that are out there. But I would be happy to do that with you. It's just not something that I can just throw out on the top of my head, like which compost you should use specifically for phosphorus.
All right, we got another question here about no-till. So the question is, in high productivity market garden no-till systems, are you eventually completely stopping the application of compost?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, if you get enough soil organic matter and you've remediated your soils to the point where adding more compost can actually add too much of this material. Like there are certain areas in California that actually have more soil organic matter that they're just like, no, you can't apply compost. Like we don't need any more of this. It's very rare, very few places that have that, but there are some that are just like, no, like actually adding compost can lead to like nitrogen leachate or actually cause like actually be degrading to the environment. So yeah, there's a certain point where you're like, yeah, you don't need more compost. You're good. You've got your soil is healthy. It's got plenty of organic matter in it. It's got plenty of nutrients in it. It's got plenty of bacteria. Like you don't need any more. And so that's the hope, right? Like that you've built up your soil to the point where it's healthy enough. You don't even need to keep applying. But every time you till, like I said, you're releasing those nutrients. So if you're in a no-till spot, then yeah, that's potential that you can definitely reach that.
Great. We've got a question from Ed here about organic certification. So, in your opinion, is organic certification uh, sufficient guarantee in compost for lack of contaminants such as PFAS or microplastics?
I mean, as far as I know, organic certification doesn't really test for that. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. As far as I'm aware, like PFAS really became like people became aware of that within the last couple of years even or it really became like a buzzword and started becoming like more and more of a concern as we start to learn more about them. But as far as I know with organic certification, I don't know if they even require you to test for them. At least like when I was doing it, I don't remember actually having that be part of the test. It was something that kind of came into my awareness later. And yeah, so I would say like in terms of that certification, it's not like a satisfaction guarantee. But I will also reiterate that like PFAS are in your water already. They're everywhere. You're already being exposed to them. So
Well, I wonder if the question has
like I'm less concerned about them in the compost because they're just everywhere already. If we want to worry about PFAS, then we need to worry about the production of them, in my opinion.
yeah, I wonder if the question has to do with when you're purchasing compost that's certified organic, whether or not you can assume that means it would be free of those contaminants.
Yeah, and I wouldn't assume. I wouldn't assume that.
Yeah.
Um, you can, so like if you're get sourcing it from like a municipal facility, you can assume that there's possibly more in there than in taking it from a facility that only works with like agricultural waste, for instance, like manures and things like that, then you you might find that there are less in that just because of the material, the feedstock that they're using is less like because PFAS we get it from like the pizza boxes and like fast food ware, things like that that are like it's grease reduction that allows for these materials to be used longer to not degrade as quickly. And so that stuff when it ends up in our waste is going to end up in your compost. And so like a municipal facility might actually have more than some place that's using like more animal manures and just not collecting those feedstocks. But I really want to I'm wary to like villainize municipal facilities in this case because I really want to support municipal facilities because they are providing a service of dealing with our waste. So when I'm looking at compost, I'm looking at it from the waste management aspect as well as the soil fertility aspect. And I know as growers, we don't necessarily want to be putting this material onto our fields, but I also want to be like really supportive of the people who are dealing with our waste and really give them an outlet for actually making that happen and making that continue until we change the way that we are working with waste and we reduce the amount of waste that ends up in these facilities. We really do need them. And so I'm I think that there are a lot of challenges for our municipal facilities, and I think that they are facing them as well as they possibly can. But we're we kind of have to like give and take. We kind of have to work um with these folks so that we and hopefully just go after the people who are manufacturing them so that we don't actually have to deal with them as much.
Great. And final brief question here. We've got what about if you have super high organic matter, but also really heavy clay soils? Any thoughts on improving soil texture if you then cut out compost amendment?
Um, yeah, I mean, compost is really helpful for soil texture. Um, I think it's kind of more neutralizing, but if you already have really high organic matter, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that one a little bit longer because that would, if you want to improve your soil texture, that would be like my first go-to is be like, yeah, add some compost, which you might still want to because you're using, but yeah, I mean, I would still maybe consider using it. It really, yeah, I'm not sure. You'd really have to depend on what you're working with particularly. I think, yeah. Oh, yeah. Somebody put on here adding cover crops to like help break apart that clay bed. That could be pretty helpful. Um, and I'm trying to think of like how to deal with clay soils because there are certain things you don't want to add because it just makes it worse. So yeah, I would say like maybe still use some compost, but that's just me. I'm not entirely sure. I don't want to give the wrong information.
All right, well, we are at time. So just a huge thank you, Britta, for joining us today and sharing all your knowledge and wisdom around the great wide world of compost. And thank everybody here for joining us for the very first workshop of this year's California Small Farm Conference.
Thank
So we
you.
hope to see you all at the next workshop. We've still got several more days of content, and we hope you all enjoy yourselves. We will see you soon.
Yeah, cheers. I just Bye everyone. Thank you so much.